And welcome back, Sidney Kirkpatrick with us. Sidney, did we have the kind of equipment that we needed to look at Edgar Cayce's brain and things like that to see if it was unusual?
No, but I mean, the one of the most compelling things to come along is AI.
Oh yeah.
You use AI to study the readings. Wouldn't that be something? Because being able to log in or something and go to a specific ailment one might have or disease and find out everything, Cayce said about that. And, it's just with the internet and all kinds of new technology. I mean, it's an exciting time for anyone studying Cayce.
What have some modern medical professionals said about Cayce's readings with medical health issues?
Oh, that's really coming to the forefront now. The example, I mentioned earlier is light treatment, light therapy. In Cayce's time, the idea of putting this purple bulb light, running it up and down your legs, or using it to treat arthritis, just didn't, it just seemed ludicrous. Breast cancer, Cayce had a lot of things to say about breast cancer, and one of the treatments, you have to be careful because every patient is different. I mean, the pathology is slightly different, so one size doesn't fit all. But in some of the most interesting breast cancer readings, Cayce recommends the husband of the patient to raise a certain kind of rabbit.
A rabbit?
A rabbit, and he is to skin that rabbit and use the pelt, the fatty tissue right under the fur, on his wife's breast, and that one of the cutting edge treatments now for breast cancer is an enzyme that rabbits produce.
That's amazing. That is truly remarkable.
Right.
Let's go to the calls. Robert in upstate New York to get us started. Hey, Robert, go ahead.
Yeah, it's a real pleasure to speak to Sidney and, of course, always to you, George.
Thank you, Robert.
I had the pleasure of being at the ARE conference some time ago and had the pleasure of meeting Hugh Lynn Cayce and the two medical doctors that gave a presentation on how Edgar Cayce's readings had scientific bearing and evidence. And another area that I'd like to have a guest address is what specific treatment he used in his own ailment, and also is there any link between my good friend who I admire greatly, Dr. Joel Wallach, and his Joel Wallach using some of Edgar Cayce's prophecies and treatments, and is there a link between the two? And I'd appreciate some comments on these matters. I think everyone would be interested. I know Gina thought these were important.
Okay, well, Doc Wallach is on next Tuesday, so I'll ask him that question about the Cayce. And how about the medical community again, Sidney, with this?
More and more, the medical community is embracing this work. When I was in the hospital, I got our surgeons and physicians to start reading, the Cayce biographies. And once they get over this can't possibly be true, because the evidence is overwhelming. I mean, that's one of the great things. That you take a skeptic and you lead him into the Cayce vault, and one of the things that hits you is there is so much evidence that this was indeed happened, and these are Cayce's words, that once you open that door, and my wife often jokes with me about this because I was a real skeptic when I started in on Cayce.
Were you?
Or she introduced me to Cayce. We had this terrible tug of war, and I believe that anybody who would put their faith in a psychic ought to visit a psychiatrist. I came from a, straight up and down Presbyterian background, and I just wasn't going to go there. I couldn't open myself up to it.
Boy, did you change, right?
Yeah. The archivist at the time, we don't know whether it was an accident or not, actually locked us in the vault overnight.
At ARE?
The Cayce vault, yeah, at ARE.
I love that. Do you care to share what you did with the gallbladder, how you fixed yourself?
Yes. Among many different suggestions and treatments, you take high-quality beef. Well, actually, I'm going to put you on with Nancy right now because she was the one.
Right.
Beef juice.
Beef juice.
It was a,
really?
high-quality cut of meat.
But that was something that Cayce recommended?
Yeah, you have to hold it.
Are you sure you want?
Hi, Nancy. You're on the air with me. Millions of people are listening to you.
Wonderful.
So
the beef juice is extremely good for rebuilding anyone's body from just about anything. And you take really tiny little bits of it, almost a dropper full, under your tongue, or you take little tiny sips over the course of a long period. The way you make it is you get a rump roast, something along those lines, and ideally, grass-fed and organic and all of that. And you cut it up into maybe 1-inch squares. You put them into a jar without anything else, no water or anything, and then you put the jar in a boiling water and you let it go for several hours, maybe 3 to 4 hours. And then when you're done, you strain the juice out of the jar that the meat was in. You throw the meat away, as Cayce said. It's not even any good for your dog. And then you have very small amounts of the beef juice. You keep it refrigerated, and you sift off any fat, before.
Yeah, it rises to the top.
Yeah, exactly. And you can use it, as long as you keep it refrigerated, you can use it for maybe 3 days. And it makes a very small amount, but you don't need a lot. And it rebuilds the body in a spectacular way. He said that that little bit of beef juice prepared that way was the equivalent of a full meal in terms of.
That's amazing. Would beef broth that you get in a can work too?
No. Because it's been watered down, it hasn't been prepared properly.
Okay.
It's been mixed with water. So unfortunately, no, that would be so much easier. And I certainly, through these last many months of illness, it would have been easier for me. But because, you have to stick around when you've got something boiling on your stove for several hours.
How soon did you see a change, Nancy, with Sydney?
He was almost comatose at one point. They told us on 2 or 3 occasions that he had 2 days left to live, and
oh my God!
he couldn't speak, he couldn't wiggle his toes. He was in pretty bad shape. But as you can tell now, he's doing super well.
He's up and he's kicking.
17 months, yeah.
Good. All right, put him back on. Thank you, Nancy.
Putting him back on. Thank you.
Okay, great.
See what a great asset I have in my wife.
Absolutely. She saved your life.
And, when we met, she was like a steadfast believer in Cayce, and that's why we had this tug of war. Eventually we married.
You're a believer now, Sydney. Big time.
Yeah.
Let's go to Ed in Tehachapi, California. Hey, Eddie, go ahead.
Hi, George. I have a story to share. I thought I'd rescue Sydney and let him rest a couple of minutes. It's 4:15 in the morning for the poor guy, and he's still recovering. And this concerns where you used to live in Detroit.
Yeah.
And it's funny that you started the hour with rabbits because one of the stories I've told many times to friends, particularly professional or technical friends. I've been a member of the ARE since 1970, and often bring up the subject. But anyway, back at the turn of the early 1900s, there were several people who came to Cayce who had what he then diagnosed was skin cancer, which, even now is a rough situation for some people.
Melanoma, right?
Yeah. And Cayce said, here we go with the rabbits. Cayce said, and it sounds a little bit gross at the time, not too much, but I'll just warn you. He said, take some of the, what are we going to call it?
Blood.
Take some of the rough skin mess of the.
I think Eddie's talking about there's a blood you can take. It's a serum.
No, I'm saying what. Let me finish. He said take some of the, we'll call it the pus, okay, from the wound, and he said inject it under the skin of the rabbit. And when that same lesion forms on the rabbit, take some of that material and put it on the skin. Now, that's Cayce's story from the early 1900s. Now we go to 1967 at Wayne State University.
In Detroit.
Yep. Yeah. And guess what? They came out with a big announcement. Skin cancer cure from rabbit serum.
Wow. That's a great story.
Thank you for sharing that.
Thanks,
great.
Ed. Isn't that amazing? From a hit in the head with a bat, huh? Truly remarkable. What did Cayce say, Sidney, in the research you did about his abilities?
Where they were from, it's there's been a lot of debate over the years about who or what was coming through Cayce. Was it his higher self?
Who was that voice that came through his body?
Exactly, but it's never spelled out, and it varied depending on the kind of reading. Like it's clear. This is why I say studying through AI would be so helpful, because you can isolate different tones of voice. Like Cayce's voice, who or what came through changed ever so slightly depending upon who the patient was and what they were suffering from. Like the medical readings, or most of the medical readings seem to be coming from the same place. Some super-powered physician in the universe somewhere that had X-ray vision. And I know those are all superlatives, but that's really what it was like. It was like he was looking through, it was like he was looking right into somebody's body. But then you have the astrology readings, which seem to be from a different source altogether. A lot of people believe that it was Jesus who was actually, that Cayce was channeling Jesus. I don't know. All I know is that if we continue to study these readings the way we are, I think we'll reach some conclusions that were literally impossible while Cayce was alive.
Dramatic. Let's go to Barry in Rock Hill, South Carolina. Hello, friend. Welcome.
I tell you what, buddy, what a great show tonight. And I have got a super comment about Edgar Cayce.
All right.
First of all, I want to say that Gina Salvati is absolutely the greatest call screener. She needs to be right there with you and Tommy. But anyway, I just wanted to brag on her. She's just super.
Thank you.
Anyway, I used to go to Edgar Cayce's museum. I lived up on the Outer Banks of North Carolina, and I'd go up to the end of Highway 12 in North Carolina and drive up the beach on the sand and into Virginia. And I've been there 5 or 6 times, and just a fascinating character, and I'm so glad you guys are talking about it tonight. But, George, let me tell you real quick, a terrible thing. The concert with Billy Gibbons and ZZ Top, Lord have mercy, I've never been so disappointed. I made it all the way there, made it halfway to the stage, 3 tickets waiting for me, VIP treatment after I got to the ticket booth, and I did not make it there.
I heard you collapsed.
Yeah, I fell out in the thing. The rescue squad came and helped get me back to the car. And I had 2 hours more to go before the show even started, and I just could not make it.
And you know, Billy Gibbons had your name posted on his microphone so he could mention you.
Oh, goodness sakes, a lot for telling me that.
I wanted you to know. Thanks, Barry. Appreciate that. And remarkable stories about Edgar Cayce. I mean, can you imagine today, Sydney, with social networking and massive media coverage and cable news and shows like ours, the exposure that guy would get today?
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah, well, the readings are available to study. I wish we had more of the science readings, because we know, for instance, that Cayce gave readings, a reading at least, for Nikola Tesla as well as Thomas Edison. He gave them in Bowling Green. We have the approximate date. We can put Edgar and Nikola Tesla in the same building at the same time, but we do not have the reading because they weren't. They didn't have a stenographer back then.
Wow.
And that's sad. However, we do have these readings for this IBM. This engineer became, eventually pioneered developments at IBM. He developed FM radio, for example, under David Sarnoff.
Yeah.
Who also had readings.
That is something else. I mean, the who's who of America all probably wanted to get to Edgar Cayce for a reading. Would you think?
Yeah. Well, there are also a number of celebrities, of course, who are Cayce students. Jim Carrey, for example, we know of his interests. We've had.
I guess you could say I'm one of them too.
Yeah, Pharrell Williams.
Truly remarkable. I mean, he was an individual. I would have loved to have met him, Sydney.
Mm-hmm.
That would have been fun.
Yeah.
That would have been exciting and stuff like that. Can people email you through your website?
Yes. CayceUniverse.com is a good place to start.
All right, great. We've got that linked up for you at coasttocoastam.com. We're going to come back in just a moment and take final phone calls with Sydney Kirkpatrick as we talk about the life of the sleeping prophet, Edgar Cayce, right here on Coast to Coast AM. And again, his books, Edgar Cayce, An American Prophet, and True Tales from the Cayce Vault. Those were just a few of them, of the most recent. And welcome back to our final segment with Sydney Kirkpatrick as we talk about the life of the sleeping prophet, Edgar Cayce, An American Prophet. True Tales from the Cayce Vault as well. You know what's amazing, Sydney, is how you became a believer from being such a skeptic.
Yeah, well, a lot of people have commented that it was because I was such a skeptic and Nancy was such a devoted student of the Cayce readings that we've been able to write what we have and to tell the story and research the story, because we have two sides of a coin. But of course, as I say now, I'm just, I'm Nancy has pulled me along, and I bless her for that.
You're a believer. Wild card line, Ed in Charlotte, North Carolina, to get us started. Go ahead, Eddie.
George, you've had some real intense shows the last few weeks, and you've done a phenomenal job. Some of the questions you ask even shocks them, and you can tell they're having to think through it.
Well, thank you.
As usual, you've done a phenomenal job, but, we're going to hold you to that, son.
You're going to expect it all the time now, huh?
Yeah, I spent a lot of time studying Cayce, I guess 60 years ago, Mr. Kirkpatrick. I got one or two quick things, and then I got a couple of quick questions. One, George, I want you to understand, It wasn't he wasn't following his own advice. He with his condition and his age, he knew he was supposed to cut back. But what happened is when the war started, so many mothers were crying and pleading with him to get a reading on their children overseas. Were they injured? Were they still alive?
Oh, my God.
And he couldn't turn them down, is what it amounted. He had too good of a heart.
Yeah.
So that's why that happened. Also, he read the Bible from front to back every year. And he talked at church, and where he lived it was segregated, and he wouldn't do it unless they let the black community in the church whenever he spoke. So he integrated the church where he lived. He also, one of the early stories, he fell asleep. His dad was reading spelling to him out of the spelling book, reading words, and he fell asleep when his dad had to go do something, and his dad had handed him the book, and he fell asleep, and his head fell over on the book. And when his dad came back and read the words, he could spell every word in the book. And then also a doctor took advantage of him early on and wanted to see if it was a real deal, and asked him the longest and smallest muscle in the body, and had him spell the smallest muscle, which is in the lip, and it's 52 letters.
Wow.
So he's the real deal now. I want to ask Sydney, I'd like one or two things. One, Lemur, anything about Lemur in Atlantis, any technology or crystals, anything you can tell us about? And also, was the beet juice real helpful with you? Was that the primary thing that turned you around? And if so, did it take a week, a month, or what?
Well, it was incremental, but it certainly saw me through the really difficult moments. And, but there are all kinds of other treatments you can use in combination. Castor oil often comes up in the Cayce readings. There's a film director from Japan who was dying of brain cancer, and he was not disposed to using alternative therapies, but the doctors, everyone said he was going to be dead in a few months, and so he started exploring, found his way to Cayce, and just went on intensive Cayce treatments, of which castor oil, using castor oil was a primary treatment.
Yeah, he was a big fan of that. Big fan of that, wasn't he?
And has since made a movie. It's in Japanese, so it's I guess there's English translations, but it's made Cayce very, very popular in both China and Japan.
Thanks, Ed. Appreciate it. Cornelius in Louisiana is with us. Hello there, Mr. White.
Hey there, George and Sydney. Look, George, I want to make one quick announcement. There's a faithandblue.org, and this weekend, Pastor Markel Hitchens, all over the United States, he's trying to unite the black community in cops. So that's faithandblue.org. Support your local police officers and stuff, because you got corrupt white officers along with corrupt black officers, and he's trying to unite the black community and the white community and supporting our officers that are not corrupt and everything.
And many of them are not. Many of them are not.
Yes, the bulk of them are not, George, and you're right. And they're listening to us right now. So I pray for every law enforcement officer and firefighter and first responder in the military. Now, George, they call me the God Guns of Gold man, the Bible Bullets and Beans man. It was good to hear from Barry and Ed. And I didn't know that story about Cayce integrating the church and everything. That's a good story. My question for you, Mr. Kirkpatrick, and I love Gina Salvati, and great song with Nat King Cole, We Need to Smile. My question for you, since he was in the Bible and stuff like that, Cayce read the Bible and stuff, do you believe that we're in the end times and the mark of the beast, is it getting ready to come out? I believe we are. George is always advertising about this digital currency and BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, and China, and South America uniting, forming their own super currency.
South Africa, not
South Africa, not South America. But uniting to form their own central or digital currency. So did Edgar Cayce talk about Bible prophecy, the end times, the Antichrist, Thank you, George, and God bless Coast to Coast AM.
I think he talked a lot about biblical prophecy, didn't he, Sydney?
Yes. Yes, and certainly I would be inclined to believe, based on the Cayce readings, that we are headed towards the end times. And one of the things to really look out for are earthquakes. That's going to be that's going to be a triggering mechanism and one of the very first signs. But of the end times coming. It's scary, and it's scary being in California, because California, according to Cayce, is going to be hit really hard, might even drop off the map.
Oh, geez. Let's go to Mayat in New York City. Hi, Mayat. Go ahead.
Yes, good morning, gentlemen. Sydney and Nancy also. I'm looking forward to getting that beef recipe down. But I want Sydney to actually, in reading some biography of Cayce some time ago, I remembered that he had some significant problem, which I can't remember, so I'd like you to flesh it out, where that's what got him to explore hypnosis. And also, wasn't he having a problem in school so that he accidentally fell asleep? This is before the spelling book, but he fell asleep and woke up and knew the context of the book. And if you have my questions, thank you, George. I'll listen over the air.
Well, you're referencing two stories from his early childhood. And, yes, he lost his... he had a severe case of laryngitis, which is what prompted him to be hypnotized. And he did it, he attended, with the woman he eventually married, a vaudeville hypnotist show, and was hypnotized. And he was actually hypnotized several times before they figured out what was going on. But in one remarkable case, the hypnotist thought the audience would enjoy him Cayce playing the piano, and Cayce had never had any piano lessons or anything like that, and the hypnotist believed he would just go to this piano on stage and start banging away, just like other guests would climb imaginary ladders. Only when Cayce did it, he started playing, beautiful, beautiful music, and it just astonished everyone.
Like he'd been a concert expert for years.
But there were all kinds of mystical, unusual clues in his very early childhood. Like he saw had imagined what his parents called imaginary playmates. His Aunt Lulu actually was ready to take him, teach him religion, and brought him to church because she was so sure that this was somehow the work of the devil. But he had imaginary playmates. Only his playmates had first and last names and came from exotic locales that an 8-year-old child in rural Kentucky shouldn't know about.
Let's go to Gene in El Paso, Texas. Hi, Gene. Go ahead.
Good morning, gentlemen, and thanks for taking the call. Sydney, it seems to me that maybe 50 years ago or more, I saw some images of visions that Cayce had of Earth changes, and you were referencing California. I also saw there were pencil drawings of what the changes would be. For example, the Gulf Coast of Texas was all flooded up into central Texas, and I particularly remember this because my little part of the country seemed to be in a sweet spot between these two Earth changes.
Interesting take. Go ahead, Sidney.
Well, Cayce didn't draw, as far as I know, in a trance session, except for maybe some of the science readings. But certainly one can make an argument with the rising oceans, that whole parts of Texas as Florida are going to be in deep, deep trouble.
Would you say his health readings were the most accurate of everything he talked about?
Well, they're the most accurate, I think, because they're the easily verified. Like he says, your blood pressure is 140 over 60, and they could check that. And it was done several times because skeptics were always testing him, and they would have a patient in one room, and Cayce would give a reading in the next room, and so it was hard to deny that Cayce was speaking the truth. The more esoteric readings, like the ghost readings and spirit readings, how do you verify that? I don't know, but those, they haunt me. Haunt me even today. They're frightening to read.
Let's go to Brendan in Clearwater, Florida. Hey, Brendan, go ahead, sir.
George, Sydney, thank you guys for everything you guys do.
Thank you.
Just a quick comment a couple quick comments and then a question about the celebrities that would seek out Edgar Cayce. One of them, if I remember correctly from Sydney, your book, was Houdini, who made it a point of exposing the frauds because he took it as an insult of all the hard work he went through.
That's right.
These people show up and pretend that they can have all these abilities, and so he would expose them. And apparently he met with Edgar Cayce on 2 separate occasions for 8 hours trying to expose him behind closed doors, but came out publicly and never said a thing about Edgar Cayce. I found that interesting. Another thing about imaginary friends, another great mind, Nikola Tesla, who was plagued by little sounds. Who knows if he had certain levels of autism, but things were huge flashing lights that he would have to build imaginary scenes and continuously build them out to be larger and larger, where he said that he would have conversations with imaginary people that were every bit as satisfying as speaking face-to-face with a real person. I found that interesting that they shared that similar thing. One anecdote, my brother, Edgar Cayce, said never combine an acid with a dairy product. And my little brother, we're in our 40s now, but when we were in our 20s, when I was first coming into this, he would love to have a gigantic bowl of cereal and follow it up with an even bigger glass of orange juice. And I told him about Edgar Cayce. He never listened. Well, today he's lactose intolerant, and I am half living on, deep dish pizza.
Good for you. We can't take your question, though, Brendan. We're out of time, my friend, but thank you for those comments. Very poignant. Sydney, thank you, and Nancy, for being on the program. Do keep in touch with us, okay?
It's always such a pleasure, George.
It is indeed. The books, of course, Edgar Cayce, An American Prophet, True Tales from the Cayce Vault. The websites are all linked up at coasttocoastam.com. You can email Sydney through CayceUniverse.com, which is linked up at coasttocoastam.com as well. Lisa Garr in tomorrow night hosting, so make sure you're part of the program. She's got a great guest and then some open lines right here on Coast to Coast AM. And we'll be back with you on Monday. For Dan Galante, Gina Salvati, Tom Danheiser, Lisa Lyon, Lex Lonehood, Sean Ladouceur, Stephanie Smith, Chris Burrows, Tim Banal, George Knapp, and Ian Punnett. I'm George Norrie, somewhere out there on Coast to Coast AM. We'll see you on our next edition. Until then, be safe, everyone.